don't want nothing. And it looks like that's what I'm gonna get. I feel I need something. Taking my time and to help me forget about everything. Too much things running around in my brain, so come on, sweetness. Won't you help to ease the pain? Oh, love me, baby. Let me need it. Excuse me, mama. And then comes the I guess I do want something, but I can't seem to find it yet. Sometimes I feel like I'm nothing. You say I'm nothing you could ever forget. Well, that's just one thing. You said they keep me hanging on. Sometimes I could just scream. Baby, don't you do me wrong. I love you, darling. And you know that
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Lookout. Today is the 28th of July, and having fun making y'all new trailer there. Feeling legit. Music is from a funk band that used to be popular in Plumas County back in the 90s and 2000s called the Avant Gardeners, and bring a little hillbilly dance music to your morning. All right, so we're going to talk today more about Dragon Bravo. California is kind of crickets. And our mission here is to educate and inform, and so we're going where the fires are. And, like I've said before, if you're just joining us on the Lookout, we're not watch duty. We don't cover every fire. We're not really set up for that. We're kind of a one-man show right now. But I'm a wildfire analyst and mapping expert, and I've been doing this stuff for about 30 years. And so we bring the tools of the wildfire mapping and fire behavior to you and explain what's going on and just kind of show you what the tools are that the pros are using on the fire to kind of make sense of what's happening. So we're going to... Dragon Bravo is kind of a good test case in fires that are uncontrollable. And then the Monroe Canyon Fire is something we're starting to dig into, and kind of my process is spend time looking at the mapping, spend time looking at the data, and then, try to form a picture in my head of what it is and talk to you about it. So right now, I don't know the ground really well on either of these fires, Monroe or Dragon Bravo. A lot of times when we cover stuff in Northern California, I've worked a lot around the North State or been on a lot of fires in the past around the North State. Haven't got really any fire experience in Utah. I've burned in New Mexico in kind of high elevation, Ponderosa Pine, but I've never really, I've never even been to the Grand Canyon. So you're kind of getting the long distance view. And so that's what we'll start with. We're going to start off with Dragon Bravo, looking at kind of the big picture. This is this morning's satellite loop of the whole country. And large scale weather affects local scale events, right? So in the big picture here, we've got Arizona and Utah here, and we've got what's kind of known, we've got a huge area of high pressure sitting over the kind of the center of the country, kind of over the Mississippi River. And you can tell that because air circulates kind of in a clockwise direction around high pressure, and then it circulates kind of in a counterclockwise direction around low pressure areas. So right now we got a lot of high pressure that's kind of over the center of the country, and that's kind of, think of that as kind of a big bubble of denser air, and that's kind of blocking weather systems from coming into California, and it's setting up this southwesterly flow here in Arizona. Now oftentimes what we have this time of year is we get the monsoon, where you get kind of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico gets sucked up if the high is farther north. Gets sucked up in here, and it brings us nice, wet, thunderstormy rain, cloudburst kind of weather in the southwest. And we kind of haven't really had that. So that's why everything's so dry. The monsoon kind of has skipped Arizona. Usually by the time we're into kind of this, southwest wind season here, we've already gotten wetting rain, and the fire danger isn't critical. But right now, because we haven't had the monsoon, things are critically dry in Utah and Arizona. And then on top of that, the way this high is set up, it's focusing these kind of strong daily winds coming out of the south and southwest. So if we jump in a little closer here, this is the kind of the last maybe 6 hours, and you can see the overnight imagery is it's black and white, and that's thermal. So you can see a little black here of the heat of the fire. Kind of, this is the dragon, and it's a little subdued right now. And as far as the Monroe Canyon Fire, you can see is also active overnight, and already kind of starting to kind of poke up a header this morning. You can kind of tell when a header's happening because you see the shadow of a big tall thunderhead kind of underneath the column. So both fires are active, but compared to yesterday, like the Dragon Bravo fire grew 20,000 acres. So this is kind of like yesterday's growth. You can see it's just really active on the north end. And then this is yesterday's growth on the Monroe Canyon Fire. So you can see it was really active on the north end and a little bit on the south. So those are our kind of our big picture view of both fires. And then as far as Dragon Bravo, we've been looking at the weather every day. And you can see that kind of through the next 3 days, it's dry, super dry. And the humidity goes up marginally on Thursday. Thursday, there's a 25% chance of rain showing on the National Weather Service. But right now, it's warm, it's dry, it's windy. Max winds in the teens with gusts up to 23 continue to come kind of out of the southwest. There's going to be a little bit more of a westerly push tomorrow. Similar forecast for Monroe. I haven't loaded that up yet. So looking at the maps, Dragon Bravo. Someone wants to see which application you asking about. You asking about the weather? Post that in here. All right, so this application I'm using here is Google Earth, and you can't really just like open up Google Earth and turn on all the fire layers. So that's kind of my claim to fame is I'm a mapping expert and I know how to make this data that I show you. So it's not really an app per se. It's Google Earth Pro with a lot of tweaking. Okay, so Dragon Bravo, they flew it last night. We've been talking about the spread and the progression, and this line here, they had a lot of clouds, and they couldn't map this part of it. So we mapped this part of it this morning using satellite heat detections and a satellite image that was captured in the middle of the morning. So 20,000 acres added on the north here, and let's just kind of open up our progression map here to kind of try to make a little sense of that. All right, so if you've watched the program for a while now, you saw that we kind of load. This is the progression map that shows daily fire progression. And they didn't update it today. There's a new team on the fire, and they've got their hands full with, getting up to speed with the mapping and everything else. And the progression map, oftentimes, is kind of it's a nice thing to have, but it's not your priority when you're making maps on fires. Is making maps for the firefighters, not for the public, not for people like me to use for anything else. It's your priorities, make sure the firefighters have the maps that are going out in the ground. So they didn't update the progression map, but that's fine. We've got our own kind of progression here, and let's just make our outline here red. So what we did yesterday was we drew lines on here for daily spread, and they're still there. So let's so here's where the fire was a couple days ago. And this is where it was at the end of the night before last. And so yesterday we looked at it and we're like, hey, it's going to, likely it's going to burn that same interval or more. And so, yeah, it did. It's like way out here now. And that's not too surprising just because the fuels are pretty continuous through a lot of this. They go from kind of mixed conifer and thick forest to desert and kind of flashy, fast-moving fuels. We don't really see any new mapping out here, and that doesn't mean the fire didn't move. It just means that it was all clouded out and they didn't get any mapping. But it's pretty much doing what we thought it was. It's all the way out into here now. Kaibab Lodge is still up here, and it's still not threatened. And it's kind of the forecast is not. There's no kind of winds in here that are gonna take it straight towards the Kaibab Lodge. But that's the basics there. It's like when we look at the kind of the bigger story of this firefight, we see that we've been talking for days. They lit this firing operation off the park boundary road, hoping to contain the fire within the park, and that worked for 3 or 4 days. But now the fire, this part way down here, kind of ended up eating their lunch, and they kind of knew it would. They've been talking about that for days. So you get these when they add on to this progression map, you do get these interesting stories in here of like things that humans did to try to change the outcome, and then the fire was kind of like, hey, well, I don't care. I'm hungry. It's windy. So basically where the fire is spread out into now, it kind of burned right through the wilderness area. This wilderness, Saddle Mountain Wilderness, is just kind of this kind of transitional kind of bluff country between the rim up here that's 9,000 feet and this kind of plateau down here that's 6,000 feet. So there's an amazing amount of relief. There's 3,000 feet of vertical relief in this image here. And the fire's just kind of romped through that in the course of a day, really. So the fire's going to continue to spread north. If we look at the briefing map, they've been prepping roads out in here to use as firing or to use as control lines, and maybe that means that they fire off of them. We've seen so far in this fire what happens when you put fire on the ground in the middle of a massive event. So at least on this one, when they put the fire on the ground, the fire didn't spread on from their firing operation. It held the fire up for a day or so, but it didn't really change the outcome of the fire getting out into this country. So one of the problems with these roads here is just that depending on how the fire spreads into them, they may or may not present tactical kind of firing opportunities. If you're trying to fire off this road to create another catcher's mitt, and the wind's blowing this way, the wind's not super useful or helpful to you trying to light off here. You light off here and the wind might take it across the road. So the problem with using roads as fire lines is oftentimes they're not really oriented in the direction that makes the most tactical sense for firing or for holding or anything else. You just start working with them because they're already there. They represent a break in the fuels. But what we see a lot in fires like this is just that the fire is going to keep doing what it wants to do, regardless of suppression activity, until the weather changes. So Thursday, if we get a little rain or a little moisture, it might buy some opportunity for the firefighters, but a day or two of opportunity on a fire this size isn't really that big a window of opportunity, because you might do a lot. You might put a bunch of fire on the ground under optimum conditions, and then 2 days later you might be back into the same hot, dry, windy, and your firing might not work. So firefighters have really limited options, and the thing, like we said before, that puts out fires like this is either they run out of fuel or the weather changes. And right now this fire's got plenty of fuel out to the north here now that it's on the Kaibab. So still a few miles away from the Kaibab Lodge. And like we said, the direction of spread is not like pointing straight at that. As it gets farther in the desert, there's less fuel out here. But this is a big fire, and it's going to get bigger. One thing we looked at this morning, or that I was loading up, is fuels treatment projects that have happened on the Kaibab. And so these are projects that are color-coded by year that they're planned or executed. So like here we've got a bunch of broadcast burning that got done in 2018, which is kind of too long ago to really make much of a difference as far as like cleaning up pine needles. Here there's a big broadcast burn that's planned for 2026 that's not done yet, so it's going to get burned now. Here's a broadcast burn that's planned for 2027. Over here is one that's planned for this year that hasn't happened yet. And so we see this a lot with the Forest Service, is the Forest Service gets stuck in planning jail, and they've lost so much expertise that a lot of stuff that's getting planned just ends up burning in a mega fire before it actually gets executed. Like, it's easy to write the plan. I mean, it's not easy to write the plan. It takes a ton of work and effort, but it's easy to kind of think up a giant prescribed burn and draw it on the map, but then trying to actually get it done, like not only get through all the environmental planning and everything else, surveys for arc sites and spotted owls and old piles of tin cans left by some picnickers, that were here in the 1930s. That's an arc site. So it's kind of ridiculous, the amount of planning that it takes to do the work. And then it comes time to do the work and all the firefighters are like exhausted because they spent the whole year getting their asses kicked by an unfightable mega fire. And they're like, man, I gotta go get some therapy. I gotta check in my family. No, I don't want to burn on Thanksgiving now that you think it's prescribed fire season. So some work's been done out here. Some big broadcast burns have been done here in the past. Some of these big broadcast burns in the past have turned to wildfires. Let's see. This is the Red Point 2024. This might actually got done. I don't know. It's a word in 2024. I don't know if it's done. I don't think it's done. Anyway, so that's, one of the things we got going out there. Another thing we got going out here is fire history. The warm fire. We look for recent fire history that might have changed the fuel type to a point where, it'll slow the fire down. Nothing really in the near area in the next 30,000 acres that is going to significantly change the outcome. Out here, there's a prescribed fire that happened in 2016, and this fire is kind of burnt right through it. Interestingly, you can see that fire had the same shape as this fire. So that's Dragon Bravo. Fire's going to keep burning, and not much anyone's going to do about that. So let's go check out the next fire. There's also the White Sage fire up here that I don't have much about. We spent $20 million on that one. Dragon Bravo, they say they spent $25 million, but it always ends up being more. So let's fly up here into Utah. And here's Monroe Canyon, which is basically kind of east of Highway 70 and how far south of Salt Lake City? 125 miles south of Salt Lake City. So this fire's got a similar forecast to the other one, and it's kind of been spreading rapidly too. So this area, the white lines here show the perimeter from the morning of the 25th, yesterday and today. So the fire kind of doubled in size between the 25th and now, or more. These yellow areas, these areas that are kind of dark, are cooling off now, don't have much fire. The areas of yellow have scattered heat, but are kind of cooling off, and the areas of red are fresh, intense heat. So you can see on this fire, let's just kind of get our bearings if you're from around there. So we've got Monroe here, we've got 24 and Burrville. Got Ridgefield is kind of to the north, and then so you got the mountain range here. It's the Fish Lake National Forest, and you got this whole kind of mountain range. And the mountain range is it's about 100,000 acres of kind of the higher. If you come farther south, maybe it's 120,000 acres. And this fire is kind of hell-bent on burning all of that forest all at once. It's not necessarily going to do that. So what we like to do when you look at this white line is where you see the white line on the edge here, it means that the fire has not grown in the past 24 or 48 hours on that. So we've got kind of this whole kind of southeast flank of the fire is kind of cooling off and maybe done spreading. And the same, if we kind of go north up here, a lot of this kind of southwestern flank is done growing. Just because we don't see that 24-hour line, we don't see that expanding past the white line, or the red line. So, and then here's kind of our heat satellites. Heat satellites don't show any heat in these areas that were burning like 4 days ago, but they show the fire being active on the south end. So we can see that on the satellite imagery, is that activity on the south end. But this kind of center part, the good news is that this is kind of cooling off in the center around Monroe Peak. But up here on the north end, the fire is super active, and it's pretty likely that the fire is going to spread all the way out probably to 24 here. You look at these kind of long range spotting, and kind of it's useful to look at things like Dragon Bravo happening in the same climate and the same basic weather, same elevation, and see what it's doing. And like during the Dixie Fire, you could look at what was happening on the Dixie Fire, and you could look at the Caldor Fire, and you could kind of see that the Caldor was going to run wild, just like the Dixie was, basically because it was in the same fuels, same climate, same time of year, everything. So not unlikely that this fire is going to burn all the way out to the highway. Similarly to the Grand Canyon, you've got a bit of an elevation gradient. This high country here is 9,600 feet, and the highway is at 7,400, so it's 2,000 feet higher. So as you move down slope, the fuels get drier, the temperature gets warmer. Anyway, so what we saw yesterday here is that it's a weather-driven run, and that it's mainly being moved, not as dominated by topography, but by that strong kind of southwest flow. So what's interesting on this image too is that you can see the aspen groves in the higher country. They show up kind of as a different color green, and you can see that the fire's kind of like some places not gone into the aspen, but you can see that it's burned a lot of dense timber. And so I have a satellite image of this fire that was taken on the 25th. And we use these images to kind of get an idea of the severity of the fire. And you can see that it burned really severely in that conifer. It burned less severely in the aspen, but that it's kind of a standard placement fire in a lot of the conifer here. It's not, just bumping along, doing the pretty low intensity forest cleanup work. And so I would anticipate that when we get the next image here in 2 days, that a lot of this area out here that's in the heavy conifer also is going to be looking like that high severity. Another interesting thing here on Monroe is we've got fuels projects that have been conducted out here inside the burn. And so we've got here like a big broadcast burn that was planned for 2025. Don't know if it happened or not. And then we've got out here these kind of like linear aspen stewardship projects, hand piling, that are fully within the fire. And up here we've got older projects that were yarding of fuels done in biomass removal done 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And as you get farther out, we've got kind of these linear or hand piling projects that are awarded in 2024, which it says some of the stuff was completed in 2023, but oftentimes when you look at that, it's the time they completed planning. So a lot of this fuels data, it's hard to kind of parse out what has actually been done in reality versus in planning. So lots of fuels projects that have been planned. If we look at their we have a strategic operations map here, and it's kind of gobbledygook, but it shows projects that have been completed. So green is cutting units. So the crosshatch here of yellow is recent slash piling. I don't know if it's been burned, but like you can see the fires just kind of blasted across all these different polygons. Of these polygons out here, these different colors all represent different projects that have either been planned or executed. And then the fire is kind of like, oh, whatever, it's dry, it's windy. I don't care if you burn the slash, there's still a ton of timber here, that kind of thing. So, there's these real limits to affecting the outcome when you have a fire like this. Like, you can have all kinds of, we talk a lot about fuels treatment and, thinning, and, state of California wants to burn, they want to burn more, they want to treat, 1 million acres a year. But when you do a bunch of kind of scattershot projects, like, oh, we're going to thin here, we're going to burn piles over here, and then you get a 100,000 acre fire, like, it doesn't make a huge difference in the outcome. It might mean that you save some of those areas that you piled slash and burned it from. They might be the remaining green forest, but it's really difficult under extreme conditions for all these kind of piddly projects. Like, I worked on a big planning project in Nevada, and it was looking at kind of cheatgrass and how cheatgrass expansion was causing fires to become larger. And then the BLM was out there, and they were planting these little like fuel breaks of bunch grass that would disrupt the fuel continuity in theory and stop these cheatgrass fires from burning and expanding cheatgrass. But when you zoom out on the landscape and you look at like the scale of the fire, like, I could come in here and do 100 acres of prescribed fire with my magic prescribed burning machine here. Like, say we just burn that. 13 acres. We can do better than that. Huh? Let's set the bar, set the high. 35 acres. That doesn't seem right. Well, you get the picture. Come out here, you do a project, and you feel good about it. Let's say we like thin this whole hill here. 85 acres. Still doesn't seem right. But you zoom out on the landscape, and it's like fire just burns all around it. So when we talk about projects working at scale, it doesn't mean doing like 1,000 little 10-acre projects. And you got to do like a 10,000-acre project to actually change the outcome of a fire like this, and it might not be possible at all. Over here, you see this area burned in a wildfire. In it's something else. They haven't mapped this yet, but there's a wildfire out here. And so that's the kind of thing that will change the outcome. Like, the fire's not going to reburn that wildfire. And so, like we've talked about in the Klamath, oftentimes those are the sorts of things that corral a megafire. But as long as you look out here and you see this thick green out here, where the forest hasn't been, treated or managed for a really long time, that's just all kind of burn in a forest fire like today. Anyway, that's the Monroe, and these are all kind of stories that unfold over weeks. So we're just kind of getting our feet wet there. I really appreciate someone put some comments on our last video about Dragon Bravo. It was a person that had been a fire management officer on the Kaibab there, with some good kind of local perspective. And if you've got that kind of experience on the Fish Lake, I'd love to hear it. You can write to me via the Lookout. You can write comments on here. If you want to come on the show and talk about stuff that you've done and your thoughts on stuff like this, we're open to having guests. And I think when we talk about using fire for resource benefit, I know it's super fraught, and especially right now when when we've got a fire that was being managed for resource benefits, the Dragon Bravo, that is now turning into like one of the largest fires in National Park Service history. It's a tough time to talk about using fire as a tool, but we don't have a choice. Like, in my opinion, we can talk all day about scaling up fuels treatment or scaling up prescribed fire, and the scale of the problem is like not really solvable with purely mechanical means. And we're not going to, the longer we suppress fires, the more likely we're going to have outcomes like this. So it's really complicated. And I find myself laying in bed thinking about, like, I'm in these heated conversations with people who are trying to figure out what I'm actually trying to say that I believe about, managed fire. And I'd say it's a moving target for all of us who are in this business. I had friends who were great advocates for managing fires on the Plumas National Forest, and then a fire that was being was kind of a low priority for suppression resources during the 2020 lightning complex. It was kind of forgotten about. It was doing good work in the middle of nowhere. That fire got hit with a huge wind event that was the same wind event that blew up everything in Oregon and Memorial Day or Labor Day fires. And the fire that had been kind of doing good work blew up and ran like 35 miles and killed 13 people, and became for the people involved, that'll change their perspective. The people involved who are like, hey, this fire's doing good. Let's let it back to the road, everything like that. They now have to live with that the rest of their lives. And so what I'm trying to do here with Lookout is tell stories of where it works. It doesn't work all the time. We want to tell the stories. We hear mainly about the places that were total disasters. But there are places that we're getting good outcomes too. We're trying to tell both sides of the story. And my perspective changes often, as I learn more and grow. So there's no simple solutions, and this stuff, location really matters when you talk about using fire for resource benefit. It's incredibly important. Every place is different. Every place has got a different story. Every place has got a different culture. Every place has got a different need for what you would want to get out of it. And I'd say in places where we can mechanically treat and thin and use machines, by all means, let's do it. But we got to remember that that's a fairly relatively small portion of the landscape is actually places where it's conducive to, using a machine to thin trees strategically. And so for a lot of the steeper, more remote country, like management at the scale that's needed to change the outcome is kind of impossible. So I'm resigned to the fact that we're going to have large fires, and it's complicated. Not much else to report in California. So there you go. Thanks for all jumping on and joining us on this wild ride. Thanks to the sponsors. And I put a shout out, or just a request out, for people that have videos and photos and stuff they want to share with us. Get a hold of me via the link on our website on the lookout.org. And I'll show you where that is real quick. Go to lookout.org and email me right here, and I can send you a Dropbox link. But, that trailer I just played here, it's like we get a lot of great material from independent photojournalists. We're glad to give you exposure. If we got a story and we can pay you, we'd love to do it. So help build Lookout by giving us good stories and good imagery. Thanks for listening. And if you really want to help out, keep this on the air, you can become a PayPal subscriber. Give me a monthly donation, and it'll keep us rolling. Thank you all.